So this talk was an idea that I had because the sessions that I have where I'm just trying to show people how to collect fish and how to ID 15 or 20 species that they have at Hartman Creek State Park right over here. The session usually, I don't want to say degenerates, but it usually expands out into sort of just be aquatic biology 101. And we just all sorts of questions from all over the map. And this is a varied group of folks. We've got folks with lots of scientific background and training. We've got folks with none. All of us are here because we're interested in aquatic biology or living on waterfront property, managing waterfront property, managing the inhabitants of the water. So we'll see how this goes, but the main idea is that after a brief intro to general themes in aquatic biology, we open it up to you guys. So you all will run the show. The questions will dictate how we proceed. I have another collaborator in the audience too, so some of the stuff that I've been working with Lynn Markham on. Lynn Markham is a specialist in land use and land use education with DW Extension. We're working on aquatic ecology themes and fish biology themes for grade schoolers right now. She wrote a kid's book. I illustrated the kid's book for her. We're working on some new books now, kind of sort of a species by species background on a lot of the common fishes around here. So some of the stuff here are resources that we've been working with. So it's aquatic biology. Takes a 4-year degree just to get your mind around it. You got to have a lot of different backgrounds. It's a very integrated kind of a thing, and I can appreciate people who are appreciative of their aquatic environments and live on waterfront property and want to do well by the ecosystem that they have their dwellings in. But you can't just jump into it, unless you have a pile of science background. It's got to be pretty crazy, especially some of the questions that I get when I do those talks. I said that it's just all sorts of real basic questions from all over the map. So historically, there's been this division between non-flowing waters and flowing waters, or lotic and lentic, limnology, stream ecology. That's coming together now. It's more of a unified aquatic ecology type field. But you can go out and get textbooks and start reading. It's a pretty heavy on physics and chemistry usually right away. But that's the goal here. And then the stories I draw upon were quintessential in just how my mind was able to wrap around aquatic ecology and some of the themes therein. And that's all I've got to interface with the world, especially when I do talk like this. So it may come off from left field and have some bizarre starting points, but so I'm sort of apologizing in advance. But there were lots of things in my life that turned some lights on. And I worked up north at the Center for Limnology in Boulder Junction on Trout Lake for a summer, and I used to fish at Hallett Lake. It's in the Northern Highland State Forest up there. They have a research fishery with several lakes where you have to, back then anyways, I don't know what it is now, it might be on the phone, but yeah, before you fish, you get a piece of paper that you're going to fill out as you fish, and you tell them what you got and how many you got. And just on a whim, it was one of those things where my reel was all goofed up. We were fishing for smallmouth, and I fixed the reel and I started reeling in, and I caught a fish, and it was a legal-sized smallmouth. I could have kept it if I wanted to, and I didn't think anything of it. I would go back to the house there, and the researcher said, "Wow, you caught a legal-sized smallmouth. It's a 180-acre lake, and it's 60 feet deep, and we know that there are precisely 64 legal-sized smallmouth in that lake." I was like, wow, I was like 22. I never put that all together before, that a lake that size, yes, there's other predatory species in that lake, only has 60 smallmouth or so, over 16 inches. You know? So what if I was really good at fishing, and what if I kept all those? Just me. I could do that. I could eat them, right? That would change the lake like crazy. Fundamentally change the lake for that little niche of, you know, of species space. I could really have an impact on smallmouth bass if I wanted to, if I got good at it. So, you know, all sorts of weird things. Another thing especially at a conference like this, I've had students out in the real world now for 10 years, and bizarre stories, maybe not the most ethical thing, but one student worked for a pond management company, and he went back to some places over and over and over during the summer to pull out weeds. But his boss said, you are not to talk to the people about ending their fertilizer regime on their lawn. It's, you know, it's good for business, but it might not be like the most ethical thing there is. So there's all sorts of, you know, even we professionals may be in bizarre ways perpetuating urban legends and myths and those sorts of things. So I found that people just have piles and piles of questions, and I think you guys would probably be similar. So this is a management strategy for a lake with respect to fish. I'm going to try to keep everything, you know, to fish in some way, shape, or form. This may not be very satisfactory to people, but you can manage a lake on the fish side in a very antiseptic, you know, non-aesthetic, non-biological kind of way. You do what's called a put, grow, take scenario, where you dump in game fishes. Sometimes you stock the lake with forage fishes, and anglers take it out. There's no closed loop here. It's just a one-way. You know, the lake is just essentially like a gigantic aquaculture pond, fish farm, that you angle out of instead of net things out of, right? And people even fertilize lakes and feed fish. And so, you know, this will get fish for anglers to catch. This will generate fish for anglers to catch. Okay, but then I ask, you know, this is where people's questions come from. This is expensive. You're not growing your own fish, right? You're bringing stuff in from outside. You got to buy those. And is it sustainable? You know, probably not. If you shut down this end of the loop, maybe some of these fishes would survive for a while. Maybe not. Who knows? And then, you know, is it aesthetic to have a very manicured, manipulated system? And a lot of people would probably say no. And reading some of the titles of some of the other speakers here about property values and all those sorts of things, I'm sure that relates. I'm not an expert in that. But this is a thing. This is a real thing. And I think a lot of folks maybe not think this is kind of an extreme version of it, but a lot of folks, they're okay with it. This is okay. This is what I want to do when I go to the lake. So, you know, what sorts of statements or questions would we want to tackle and talk about if we're going to try to do a sustainable in-house, you know, close the loop ecological management plan for fishes in our lake. And I'm sorry, this is a new talk to me, so I'm going to be going back and forth. I don't know, well, we can't really turn that around, but a lot of what you might come up with for management strategies, you know, should consider various aspects of the lake itself. A lot of people ask me all the time, I live on this lake, it's got this and this and this, can we have such and such in there? Everybody wants all the game fishes in their lake, you know, whether it's a 20-acre muddy, mucky, weedy thing or a 2,000-acre rocky lake, they want everything in there. And, you know, you got to consider your lake's attributes. This is relatively rare, and there's many folks with lots of training in this room to gather data consistently from the same places with the same gears, coming back, every 3-5 years, is relatively rare. A lot of lake associations are really close with their agency professionals, and there are some longer-term data sets, but you got to make sure that you think about stuff like that. The habitat quality that's there and the qualities of the habitat. What attributes of the habitat are there? What substrates do you have? What's the bottom like? How many trees are down in the water? What kind of macrophytes? What kind of aquatic plants live there? What's the water regime? All those sorts of things. So you have to think about the whole lake, and we want to match species for the habitat and accommodate them at all their life stages. It's very common to stock walleyes in weedy lakes that are mucky. You better not expect a lot of spawning to occur and to be successful. That's just a one-way, walleyes can live in that, they can feed in that, they can get big in that. You can catch them out of there, but you're not going to get any self-reproducing, or very little, probably limited self-reproducing walleye populations out of there. So you have to work with agency professionals the whole way. They're the ones that are going to help you gather the data and come up with harvest regulations and targets. Remember I told you my smallmouth bass example? We have relatively small lakes around here, and I've seen lakes in 2 or 3 seasons drastically change in terms of fishing quality, right? There's this many largemouth, and then there's none. And then there's a whole bunch of bluegills that you can catch to eat, and then they're all stunted. The dynamics are rapid, and just a tiny population of anglers can really, really potentially manipulate various stocks of fishes. Try to use stocking in a limited way. Try to spend your energy elsewhere. Again, stocking is expensive. You don't want to take stocking off the table. Think about indicator species. There's this phenomenon called indices of biotic integrity. You monitor populations, insects, fishes, sometimes plants. It depends on how many you catch in a year with standardized gear. Each species has a vulnerability index in terms of how it puts up with pollution and disturbance and different things that go on in a habitat. And so the presence or absence of indicator species can tell you something about your lake. And we're always going to be striving for things. You're probably never going to arrive there. This is biology after all. You're going to shoot for these outcomes and try to wiggle with, goof with parameters and things along the way. And then, how do you want to work with your agency professionals? There's all sorts of different agency professionals, and there's private companies that work with people on this thing. And then what can you do right on your property? How can you manipulate some of the aspects of the system that I'm going to talk about in a second here, right, immediately behind you in your little chunk of the lake. So there are chemical and physical aspects of a system. And again, not a ton of folks have this training, and it's usually students like me often avoid this class or that class because it's the hard class, So I took my lumps. I lost and gained by various aspects of my own training. But they're very, very complex things. The nutrient cycles, temperature regimes throughout the year. Different lakes have different scenarios here that you need to think about. Plus, what's upstream, what's going on the land. So that's a lot about what Lynn and her crew talk about are things that happen on the shoreline and in the watershed, and how that impacts or could impact aquatic ecosystem. A lot of folks don't think about this stuff much, but it's ridiculously important. Production is is bringing energy into a system, and you're usually incorporating nutrients. This is a bunch of freshwater bacteria. Nutrients from the substrate. This is organophosphate. Pulling into things like plants, producers that are also harvesting energy from the sun to make other molecules that move on up through the food web. So production and nutrients are very important. Also, making them re-available to a system is important. So decomposition, what's going on in the muck, what's going on in the sediments where the bacteria and fungi are to release these nutrients year after year after year. So I'm going to show you a food pyramid in a second, and I'll just let things go to the Q&A time, and about on time here. So that, there's multiple levels in a food web or a food pyramid. You have low-level consumers that feed directly on the dead, dying, decaying materials. They're detritivores, scavengers, things like that. There's grazers that like to eat a lot of plant material. This is a brassy minnow. They eat a ton of plant material. Lots and lots of invertebrates. This is a nematode. That's a stonefly. There are many different groups of organisms that are working on the materials I just showed you, either directly off live plants or eating the dead, dying, decaying materials. Yes, this is a dragonfly eating a frog, or a toad, I think. So they're smaller predators that feed lower in the food web. Some of your favorite panfishes are in this group. Some things like the mud minnow you might not appreciate or know much about, but they're also in this group. And then we get to this is the more standard game fish crew, as well as some terrestrial or semi-aquatic things. So there's a crappie and a bass and mid-sized predators. Then you get to the top predators, right? There are things like muskie that can basically eat whatever comes their way and they get in their mouth, and they pull that up. And there's terrestrial or semi-aquatic things. And yes, if you're harvesting fishes, you're in this rung as well. So here's what we've been working on. And Lynn, some of the stuff didn't come through. I didn't save. This is done. I'm drawing these little icons for this thing. So I tried to do this to scale. And the thing that a lot of folks, when they're asking me questions, they don't appreciate, or that it's not commonly discussed. This part of the food web. Here, the green part is the production in the water. So that's incorporating nutrients and sending them up the food web in the water. But this part right here, and this could be way bigger than this. I couldn't fit it all on this page, but plant materials from land are ridiculously important as energy sources. To go into a lake. So if you're bagging up all your yard materials and you're cutting down your trees and hauling them off rather than letting them lay, a lot of that material is no longer going into the system. This is sort of there's a little bit of a loop here. The decomposition happens and the muck is sort of an interactive, lively place. But then the other thing that I want you to pay attention to is, there's waste at each level. It's not a perfect transfer of nutrients, but each level is smaller than the one below it. And most of your favorite fish species are way up in there. So again, if everybody pulled out all of their lawn materials and didn't let them roll into the lake, or everyone pulled out their macrophytes to have beaches and kept the trees out of the water because they're in the way, you're shaving this off, and you're shaving every slice off, potentially. It's different for each system. This is a very general picture, so you have to think about those sorts of things. Plus, and I always forget to make this point, I didn't make this point this morning, juvenile game fishes feed at lower levels in the food web, and they rely on some of the same cover, some of the same aspects, physical aspects, and chemical aspects, temperature aspects of the environment before they make their way up to the harvestable size or the adult size. So you have to consider that a lot of what goes on in the ecosystem might provide nursery habitats, right, for growing game fishes. So that also should play a role. One last thing to talk about too is, you know, you can, or we can, as you all probably know, influence the nutrient patterns in a system by runoff, hard surfaces, yard waste, and that's what Lynn was focusing on in her recent work is impervious surfaces and various impacts that research has shown different levels of impervious surfaces can have in aquatic systems in Wisconsin. So, as I was showing in that first slide with the put, grow, take fishery, you can chemically enhance, if you will, the system with non-organic substances. So those feed in at the same place as nutrients that come out of the muck that are released by the actions of bacteria and fungi. So I have a bunch of slides that folks this morning saw, if we want to reference fish species. And I've broken them down to fit in the various food web portions so we can reference them as we go. But this is where I planned on basically turning things over to you. And remember, I'm a little bit of an ecologist. I have a tiny bit of fisheries training and a little bit of aquatic biology background. Most of my graduate training was in evolutionary genetics of fishes. So there's some folks with a lot more fisheries experience in this room than I have. Some of your speakers coming up. So I'll do my best. And like I said, this happens a lot. The talks I give, and I'll, if we can keep it, to aquatics, that would be cool. And like I said, I can probably answer a lot about fisheries. I'm sorry, about fish-specific questions over others, but I'll do my best. So we'll go for it.
I've been reading for the last couple of years the decline in insect populations in the world. And are aquatic insects also declining?
Yeah, I do know some specific cases. I wouldn't doubt that they are, but yeah, in certain places they definitely are. I've read research on that. So yes, I would worry about it.
Are fish dependent upon both the aerial insects as well as the aquatic insects?
So, the life cycles of aquatic insects are varied. Sometimes they have all their life stages in the water. Sometimes the aquatic stage is the most important stage, but then they have a brief terrestrial bout and they come back and lay eggs. Sometimes it's a short period of water and a longer period on land. So the aquatic insects a lot of them have strong ties to terrestrial environments anyways. But it happens to be dominated usually by plant materials, but what goes on land washes into the water. So, and invertebrates are significant diversity-wise and biomass-wise to terrestrial environments as well. So I would answer that they're involved. I can't, there's one of the talks is an entomology talk, right? The keynote, is that tonight? Tomorrow, yeah. He'd be able to say with numbers and facts, figures. I don't know if that.
I'm trying to think of the scale, because we've been talking earlier about the decline in the walleye population. To be really widespread. I'm trying to think, what else is widespread going on a regional basis that could be impacting? Because we're paying attention to the top predators, but
yeah. So
support system.
So on land, if we did a terrestrial ecosystem, right next door to the lake, if we did the food pyramid for that too, you would see a huge first run, which includes a lot of your invertebrates, including a lot of your insects. So there are a very, very significant aspect of terrestrial environments. Invertebrates are, including insects. Yeah. But you're right. Yeah. Then, we're just seeing we're often paying attention to the tips, right? The tops, the charismatic megafauna.
talk about all smaller fishes and animals, lead up to the large predators. What happens when you have a big decline or large predators?
So there are phenomena called trophic cascades. So I just make one up a lot of times. I teach a tiny chunk of aquatic ecology in my ichthyology class because I don't have the whole class isn't fisheries makers. They get a lot of aquatic ecology. And I make up a simple scenario with a simple lake, and you could focus on the bluegill, this rung right here. And if we see phenomena like a lack of large predators, right, allows for the bluegill population numbers-wise to increase. But there's only so much energy to go around, so that you can see stunting in bluegill populations, right? So sometimes if you add larger predators, the bluegill size structure gets better. You get bigger bluegills by manipulating predator-prey. So another thing that if you go to an extreme, let's just pretend a fisherman was really good at catching and keeping bluegills and was harvesting heavily from this rung of the ladder. You can see some of these species have population increases, and so on and so forth. So there's a popular game that you do with children about food webs. You give everybody a species, and you have a ball of yarn. You have everyone stand in a circle. Who eats you? Throw the yarn to that, right? What do you eat? Throw the yarn to that. So you end up with this big tangled web of yarn, and in the end, okay, I'm gonna take the bluegill out, and you pull on the yarn, and all of a sudden everybody feels a tug on their yarn. So these trophic cascades can have influences upward, and you can have downward pressure from various shifts here, right? And they're constantly trying to examine effects that various predators have on each other in an ecosystem. What predators are better in this lake, what predators are better in that lake to grow big and fast, and how many different species can we have? So there's lateral interactions. So the answer to your question is yes. Like there's a whole bunch of potential things that can happen like that. It's going to be different for each scenario, and whether you can detect that or not depends on how much data you have, how well it's collected, how well you can analyze it. But it's weird how a lot of anecdotes that people share with me could be related to things like that. Whatever, 15 years ago we had all these things, and now we don't have them anymore. What's going on? And I try to ask, well, did they do this? Did they stock that? Did we have a nutrient source go away or something like that? Or were the farm wastes more well contained and they're not making the lake like they used to? So, see where I'm going with that? Does that make things less clear? But yeah, so you can have each level interacts with the other levels.
Yeah, I live on a 50-acre lake, so these doesn't take a whole lot to kind of dramatically change what the fishing is for various species.
Yeah, but imagine if you're really good at fishing, even if you just obeyed the harvest regulations, you could significantly.
I mean, how effective are the things like using slot sizes or lowering, how many fish somebody's able to keep and that sort of thing? Are those strategies very successful or marginal?
It's a constant process of setting up research scenarios and changing regulations. There are various states that play around with smaller bodies of water and how many predators you could take and what size. Very limited take or one species to favor another. So there's all sorts of research in fisheries. Dr. Eiserman is way more up on it than I am, but they're constantly trying to figure out, self-contained, sustainable kinds of scenarios with regard to harvest quotas and things. So I believe that they do work, and I believe that those research efforts are important, to try to come up with scenarios like that. There's always cheaters too, right? There's always people that are catching and keeping things. It really, it adds up to like.
No, I smile because
Yeah.
we hear at our board meetings, people come and complain about, hey, this guy, we see him, he comes twice a day during the spring and takes 25 fish out, 25 can fish out each time he comes, and he's fishing every day.
So you better be eating a lot, because you can only have two But you can only have, 2 limits is your possession, or something like that. I don't keep a lot of fish. But yeah, exactly. And a 50-acre lake, if you wanted to do trophy pike in there, you'd have to have a lot of buy-in. If you just keep pulling big pike out of there, it's going to take a while to get another big pike.
You see, like what we haven't seen many in the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, little lakes are interesting, very interesting to me.
We stock on a yearly basis, larger lake, and it's based on fishery reports and some netting fish count. Is there a recommended matrix fish type? So 1 northern for every 10 perch, for every 100 shiners,
Yeah.
an age group 1, 3, 5, something that we refer to.
So
Because our fisherman, if he fishes for perch, that's what he's stock. If he fishes for northern, that's what he'll stock. But what's the preferred recommended matrix? Assuming that there's plant life in the rest.
My limited experience is it's not formulaic like that. And remember too that this year you're going to have a drought, and then 2 years later you're going to have a bunch of rain. And a couple years after that it's going to be this kind of winter, and a few years after that it's going to be poor spawning for this species, and the next year it's going to be good spawning for that species. So you got to take a long view. It's a bigger lake, so it's liable to accommodate more user group needs. So you're always battling with the socioeconomic end of things, right? Like say the perch fishermen want this, and the walleye anglers want that. But a lot of what your agency managers are doing, they have very limited time and very limited resources, but what they're trying to do is match the species mixture to the environment, but then try to accommodate as many groups as they can. So unfortunately, there's likely not a formula that you can apply. If you look at your lake specifically, and you have lots of data over long periods of time, you can get closer and closer and closer to, this species does really well here. These species, they'll hang on. Maybe we shouldn't spend a lot of time and energy trying to bolster their numbers. But you got to take a long view. It's good that you have regular data coming in. That's spectacular. Is that true? Yeah. So your agency professionals, they know that every few years, or?
It's actually by the fishermen themselves and our own netting.
Okay, so you guys run your own nets. Do you try to do the same gears and the same net types in the same places?
Same location.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yeah. So you're going to get as close as you can. You're going to get closer and closer to having more definitive answers that way.
So just fill in the blanks as you go on.
Yeah, and if the data analysis is not going your way, you team up with a fish manager, and see if he or she agrees that this is working well, and but we're struggling here, and that's a winning strategy over a long period of time.
Do that for the DNR, we use the walleye, the stock walleye, and gauge their overview about the walleye population.
So, yeah, and so I'm not in that realm. I'm not super adept at understanding, because there are broader initiatives, you know, and there are certain lakes that are in certain management goals at a regional level or a state level for various agencies. So they may have you or your lake in a certain set of management practices for a particular species or two, because they're, you know, they've chosen that lake as one of the lakes that they think that they can do a lot of good with that species. There's larger efforts ongoing, you know, that stretch across larger swaths of folks and agencies and things within the DNR. So that might be why they're targeting or they're favoring walleye. But then again, you and your lake association, you know, you go talk to them and say, hey, but what about this and what about that? And they might rebuke you. Nope, this is what we think is the best way to go based on our experience and our data. But it's you know, your licenses are the major funder for a lot of what goes on among the fisheries folks in our DNR. So your voice is important. That's why we have a lot of hearings. Rule changes are not just overnight and sweeping, and you know, we do a lot of vetting and things like that. So I don't know if that helps you or makes you feel better or not, but monitoring good data consistently collected the same way, that's way better than having nothing. You guys are on the right track, I think, in terms of having the right kind of information that you can get to answer your question. Sorry, I wish I
Time for
one more question.
How big of an impact do you see on spring pan fishing where, you know, fishermen are just taking the fish right off the beds? And is there any DNR focus on trying to restrict that? And is it a pressure on fishermen saying, oh no, you can't take that away from us on my license if you do?
So yeah, personally as an angler, it just breaks my heart. It's not very sporting. Again, system by system, it's going to be different. Panfish populations are going to have different resiliencies in order for them to accommodate that. The issue often is, particularly in a spawning bed scenario, you're harvesting big males, a lot of big males. You might be pulling any sort of local genetics that there are, you know, for bigger or faster growing males out. That's a possible scenario. If it's a tiny little lake, you know, that year after year consistently, I would imagine you could easily see, you know, just watch how many beds there are from a year-to-year perspective, how many fish there are there. You could easily see if it's having an impact, even with just visual surveys. But there are tons of efforts changing different bag limits, size limits even, I've heard, for various panfishes. There's a 15 fish set of bodies of water that are out there, 15 panfish a day. And are there slots now too, or you can only have so many under a certain size? I know they're toying with that.
There's a few, yeah, I don't know, across North America, there's a few like maximum length limits where you can keep smaller fish, but have to let larger fish go.
Yeah. And if you have long-term data sets that are well collected, oftentimes you can see generational, you can see cohorts, you can see the results of the spawn from this year going through a system. So you can see dips and peaks. And if you enact a regulation, I don't know how that would work. Like if you wanted to end bed fishing on just your lake, I think you still have to go through the whole process, and every user should have a chance to weigh in on that. And I think it has to go to all the different hearings, but you should be able to get data back as to whether or not that works for your lake. So different panfish populations have different resiliencies, and you know, it depends on forage and all kinds of things. Age structure, how fast the panfish grow in that lake, what's the average, you know, recruitment of youngsters from this spawn, you know, bout of spawning into the next generation on a year-to-year basis. It's just all sorts of things that play into that. But I just don't see it as being one of the more sustainable ways to deal with panfish, put it that way. And over the course of me growing up in central Wisconsin, there were a couple of private lakes that we would sneak down to, and man, did the size structure change on those lakes when just a few people would sneak down. When we were just the first couple that were trespassing, it was way different. And then after dozens of people trespassed, there was a big change. And a lot of the fishing was ice fishing and then fishing off the beds and spawning seasons.
All right, thank Justin for his
Thank you.
presentation.